Welcome back to The Explainer, everyone. Today, we're literally popping the hood on our own minds to decode the biological machinery of our emotions. We're going to be using the frameworks of Deus Intus to figure out exactly how we can move from that state of constant, exhausting reaction into a really solid state of calm, grounded authority.
So, picture this. You're in a high-stakes meeting, somebody directly challenges your work, and before you can even process their actual words, your chest gets super tight and you just snap back defensively. And the crazy part? You kind of watch yourself do it, almost like an out-of-body experience. Logic hasn't even joined the chat yet. What you're experiencing right there is a classic emotional hijack.
Okay, so here's our roadmap for today's explainer. We'll be covering the modern amygdala hijack, your brain's two pathways, widening that response gap, the emotional command protocol, nervous system maintenance, and finally, how to achieve emotional sovereignty. Let's dive in.
Section 1. The modern amygdala hijack, your ancient alarm system. Look, we exist in this wildly modern landscape of tight deadlines and, passive-aggressive emails. But biologically speaking, our amygdala still reacts to an email from Janice in accounting exactly as if a saber-toothed tiger were hunting us on the savannah. When that primitive alarm rings, this massive flood of adrenaline and cortisol just completely commandeers your body. It completely bypasses your permission and takes the rational, logical part of your brain, your prefrontal cortex, completely offline.
Moving to Section 2. Your brain's two pathways, the race for control.
To understand why this feels so entirely out of your control, we have to look at the thalamus. Think of it like a biological air traffic controller routing sensory data down two very different roads. First, you've got the low road. This acts first. It's primitive, automatic, emotion-driven, and honestly, it's just trying to save your life like a highly sensitive smoke detector. Meanwhile, the high road routes data up to your prefrontal cortex for deliberate analytical thought. The issue? Well, treating burnt toast like a raging house fire just causes a lot of unnecessary chaos in our day-to-day lives.
Get this. What's truly fascinating is the sheer speed of that low road. Your amygdala can flag a perceived danger and trigger a massive fight-or-flight response in roughly 300 milliseconds. Think about that. That is literally a fraction of a heartbeat.
But, on the flip side, it takes more than 800 milliseconds for your slow pathway, the logical prefrontal cortex we just talked about, to actually process the context, compare past memories, and form a considered rational opinion.
Which brings us to Section 3, widening the response gap, reclaiming your milliseconds.
So that half-second deficit, that gap between 300 and 800 milliseconds, that is exactly why the reaction becomes the response before you even realize it's happening. I absolutely love this quote right here. The window of control is not mystical, it is neurological real estate. Your job as a high performer isn't to somehow become a robot and stop feeling emotions. It's to literally buy back those missing milliseconds from your survival circuitry and consciously invest them into a deliberate choice.
Section 4. The Emotional Command Protocol, the Deus Intus system.
Okay, so we've mapped out the biology, right? But how do we actually intervene when it matters most? This 5-step system is your manual override. First up, you have to pause and recognize the physical hijack in your body. Second, deploy a sensory anchor. Third, initiate a perspective shift. Fourth, trigger a physiological reset. And finally, step 5, communication control. Memorizing this specific sequence is what actually stops that automatic messy slide into screaming, escalating, or just shutting down entirely.
Let's double-click on that sensory anchor for a second. When you're hijacked, your brain literally tunnels into this imaginary future of danger. You can radically disrupt that projection by forcing your attention onto actual, immediate sensory data. You've probably heard of this one. Find 5 things you can see, 4 you can physically feel, 3 you can hear, 2 you smell, and 1 thing you taste. Doing this sends a hardwired biological signal straight to your nervous system saying, hey, I'm here right now, and I am safe enough to think. And if we look at this visually, notice the distinct boundary separating these two states. Down below, you have the heavy matter, that dense hormonal flood of the survival response and physical panic. But by using sensory anchors and physiological resets, you're actively doing the work of pulling yourself upward. You're crossing that boundary, leaving the chaos behind, and stepping into the upper domain of pure, conscious prefrontal thought. It's a game changer.
Section 5. Nervous System Daily Maintenance. Controlling the Inputs.
Now, intervening in the heat of the moment is great, for sure. But operating your prefrontal cortex all day, it is highly metabolically demanding. If you're constantly exhausted, stability is not going to come from occasional bursts of intense effort. It comes from daily structural rituals. We're talking a solid morning routine to prevent reactivity right out of the gate, a midday walk to stop the silent creeping buildup of stress, and an evening closure ritual to clearly tell your nervous system that the work cycle is officially complete. You literally have to teach your body what to expect.
And that brings us to Section 6, achieving true emotional sovereignty, moving from I react to I regulate.
When you practice these protocols over and over, something amazing happens. They stop feeling like clunky, awkward tools, and they just become reflexes. This profound identity shift aligns perfectly with the 12 universal laws, specifically the law of correspondence, which dictates, as within, so without. It's a great reminder that our recurring outer chaos is really just mirroring our inner disorder. So regulate the inner neurological state, and you naturally, almost effortlessly, harmonize your outer life.
Which brings us to a really beautiful core belief of the Deus Intus philosophy. Growth is remembrance, not performance. True emotional sovereignty isn't some fake, detached persona you slap on to impress your boss or your coworkers. Not at all. It is simply a return to your inherent natural center, finally cutting through all that overwhelming friction of modern triggers.
And it's absolutely vital to realize this. You don't need to somehow eliminate the pressure of life entirely. That's impossible anyway. High performers aren't always perfectly calm. They are just controlled under activation. You simply train your nervous system to remain functional during the difficulty. You can feel the absolute storm raging in your body and still use your prefrontal cortex to firmly choose the ship's direction. So I'm going to leave you with this provocative thought to reflect on as you walk away from the explainer today. When that gap finally widens, when you do the work and reclaim your neurological real estate, what does your life actually look like when you are no longer governed by pure impulse? Thank you so much for exploring this with me today. Go out there and start reclaiming your milliseconds,